that's also one of the reasons why or so far it's just there's a very low possibility that it would ever happen. At least that's what we believe. Because if China ever invade without of course there's if without Taiwan ever provoking them, the United States definitely intervene. At least that's what we believe that.
Yeah.
Yeah. The US will definitely intervene. Like if Taiwan never provoked the war. Yeah, but also that will still lead to a lot of casualties. So recently, I think it was after Trump, or during Trump, during the Trump administration, the Indo-Pacific, the idea of Indo-Pacific,
free and open Indo-Pacific.
Yeah, free and open Indo-Pacific. It has become a thing that really it's become something that leaders across Asia Pacific been talking about.
Right.
Yeah, and also like the recent Japanese Prime Minister
Abe actually proposed that. Right.
Yeah. So I was wondering that, do you think that's still something that how would Taiwan play a role, like when as US is planning its way through organizing this structure? How do you think Taiwan play a role like in this structure?
That's a great question. Well, first, I should probably pay some homage to the former Prime Minister Abe, who was not only just a big ally to the US, but also he was very, very friendly towards Taiwan. And he proposed the idea of a free and open Indo-Pacific, which I think was very important. And yeah, like you said, now it's sort of become policy, or at least a policy objective of a lot of countries. So I think that it will continue to be a policy objective of the United States, regardless of who's in office. So I think it became something under Trump. And now it's more or less maybe continued, maybe weakened a little bit, but it's still there. I think that it'll continue to be something that we especially need to counterbalance China's Belt and Road Initiative, mainland China's Belt and Road Initiative. So what role would Taiwan play? That's a great question. I'm not sure I can answer that, but I think for Taiwan to play a role, I think it needs to be included by places like the US and Japan. So recently the US, in 2021, the US and Japan held a joint military operation in practice for possible contingency in Taiwan. So I think we would need more of those. I think we would need to have more dialogues with Taiwan. And I think, surprisingly, even Japan has had more in bilateral dialogues with Taiwan in the past 2 or 3 years. So I think we just need to keep pushing that. I think my understanding is that Taiwan is willing to be a part of that. It's just a matter of the US, Japan, and other Asia Pacific nations including them.
So as you can see that as the tensions between China and its neighbors are rising, do you think a kind of Asian NATO, is this something that leaders across like the US, Japan, and South Korea, or even the Philippines should be like thinking about? Like, is this something that, as you can see what's happening in Europe, do you think that in Asia, or at least in the future, the Indo-Pacific, do you think this is something, a military structure as such, is something that we should be planning on?
So that's a great question. The two countervailing models in international relations are the deterrence model and the spiral model. So would creating some sort of NATO deter aggression and war, or would it provoke war by sort of China's opposition fortifying? I think if it's done right, it could deter war. So I think that's a possibility. We just need to make sure it's done right. We need to make sure that communication is clear, and that it's a defensive organization, not something that can wage war unprovoked, but something that will defend when attacked. And I don't necessarily think we need to include every country in the Indo-Pacific. Certainly allies like Japan, Taiwan, places like that, Australia, perhaps India. I don't think we need to include every other country as a full like alliance member, but I think that's something that the US and its allies should definitely consider. I think that could be a way to stabilize the region through non-aggression, sort of the peace through strength that my former US President Ronald Reagan spoke of.
Okay, just asking your
Sure.
Your personal opinion that do you think U.S. connection between, well, I'm not sure like have calling it connection is the right word or not, but at least a relation between the Indo-Pacific countries in our context, like the countries between the U.S. and Indo-Pacific countries in the Indo-Pacific region. Do you think the connection has strengthened since Trump's presidency, or do you think it didn't?
That's a very interesting question. So,
yeah.
Well, first off, let me start by saying that, especially when it comes to the U.S. and Japan, and I think the U.S. and Taiwan as well, the thing that's really remarkable is that regardless of which party is in power, I think the alliance is still generally very strong.
Okay.
So to give credit where credit is due, Biden's ambassador to Japan right now, Ambassador Rahm Emanuel, I was not a fan when he was mayor of Chicago, but
okay.
He's been doing a fantastic job, and he's really been vocal about his opposition to China and its abuses of international law towards Japan. So I think that the alliance between the US, Japan, and Taiwan is one that's so natural that it's hard to mess it up, even if you're from a different party. But with that said, I do think that that relationship between the US and other nations is generally stronger under conservative presidency. Now with Trump, the interesting thing was people thought he was going to start all these wars because he was going to renegotiate with our allies. He was going to say, okay, well, we need places hosting US troops. We need you to pay more. We need to reorganize these things. But what we ended up seeing was peace. The US didn't enter any new wars. Russia didn't invade Ukraine. We were getting ready to peacefully withdraw from Afghanistan, but that was screwed up, I think. So I think that regardless of whether or not you agree with President Trump's rhetoric, I think that his presidency and the leadership that came out of that, I would like to mention Ambassador Robert O'Brien, National Security Advisor O'Brien. He was very good at sort of crafting these ways to strengthen those alliances. So I do think that these alliances and friendships were strengthened under the Trump administration overall.
Okay.
So what do you think?
How do I see it? Of course, under Trump administration, I think at least we have a relatively peace. Like there are no major shifted like what we have in after Afghanistan or Ukraine. There are no major there are no major regime where you call it regime change or and there are incidents like we don't have that under 4 years of Trump administration. So relatively, I think it was the moment was relatively peaceful. But for the moment, of course, there are a lot more changes that's occurring. Yeah, which would bring, well, in general, probably bring more instability. But so far, at least in Indo-Pacific region, I don't think there are much. We don't have much to. At least we're not in an imminent threat of having any major conflicts for the moment.
Right.
At least. Yeah.